is preparing. Great. I think that's live. So welcome. So good to have you here again today. Some of you I can see were here yesterday, and you've joined again today, which is really good. It was such a wonderful morning yesterday for me, and I know that so many of you have sent me messages as well. The interaction from the group yesterday and the openness from all of you was so good to see. There's so much that you can get from sharing and interacting as well. And also it gives me some information. It lets me know how you're doing. And I love seeing that interaction as well. So thank you so much. If you were here yesterday, thank you for interacting, for sharing, for really using this time to get as much as you can from it. For those of you that weren't here yesterday, I know that Nelma has sent out a replay, so feel free to go and watch the replay. If you've got any issues with getting the replay, accessing the replay, then Nelma's on the group today. Feel free to message him directly or even publicly, and he will drop you the replay. So we covered quite a bit, and I won't go into a long introduction today. I know some of you may not have been on yesterday, so I'll tell you briefly about who I am. My name's Bhavna. I'm a family lawyer. I now work in a really different way, just because when I went through my divorce, I realized that there had to be a different way of helping people through this process. And because I learned so much from getting divorced myself, I feel like I can bring a service that is different in the market, but actually works really well for clients. And if you're looking to find out a bit more about how I work, I'll ask Nelma to put details in the chat box of how you could book a call and find out a bit more. I will be sharing a little bit about how I work a bit later on, so you will be able to find out a bit more. But yeah, Nelma, would you be able to put that in the chat box, just how people can reach out if they wanted to find out a bit more? So I'm going to jump straight into the session today, really, just because I've got so much to cover. And while I'm just doing a recap of yesterday's session, I would love it if you could just tell me where you're up to. Where are you up to in the divorce process? How did you find yesterday's session if you were here? And where are you up to? You can send me direct messages. You don't have to put them in the main chat group. If you would prefer to just message me directly on here, that's absolutely fine. Where are you up to? Are you just thinking about divorce? Are you facing difficulties in the marriage, and this sort of thing has come into your head and you're wondering whether it's right for you? Are you already in the process of divorce proceedings? It's always good to know who's in the room so I can make sure that I'm catering to what you need. So while you do that, I'm going to just tell you what we talked about yesterday. So we covered yesterday how to make a divorce application, whether you should go for a sole application, what's the benefits of a sole application, whether a joint application is better. I went through the timeframes, the timescale a little bit, just because you need to understand how things work. We now have a timescale for divorce proceedings, which we didn't have before. So with the no-fault divorce, we have a timeline that we have to work towards. And I put together how finances and child arrangements are connected to your divorce application. I also talked about your priorities, your non-negotiables, and your vision for the future, because actually keeping this in mind will help you get through the divorce process, will help you get through those difficult days. Or if communication is getting difficult, it reminds you of where you're going. So keeping that strong vision for the future can really help you get through. And there was a couple of tasks that I set for day one, just to almost encourage you to take some action, because I'm happy to do all the learning with you. I can give you information, but actually what's useful is for you to take action. So there was a few tasks for day one. How did you get on with those? I hope you managed to get through some of them at least. It takes a few minutes to get through, but it's always useful if you can, put things together as I'm going through them. Okay, so I've got a few people in the chat box messaging me and letting me know where they're up to. Separated for 4 years and in the process of divorce now, trying to ensure that I'm getting it right, which feels strange to say, but actually, to the person who wrote that, yes, you do want to get it right for your benefit, for the other person's benefit, and for any children as well. Thank you for the session yesterday. It was really helpful and the homework was useful. I hope you can help me with a question regarding joint sole application. Will I be at a disadvantage if he does the sole application? He suggested a joint one, but we're not on talking terms. The advantage of him doing it is that I don't have to pay the fee. Yeah. However, I have drafted a sole application. Yeah, great question from yesterday. The only disadvantage of a sole application that he might start is that you're not in control. So I think somebody yesterday was in that position. They said that the other person had started a sole application and then they wouldn't apply for conditional order and they couldn't apply for it. So the process stopped there. So yes, that's the disadvantage of it. But actually, what you might find is that if you're in a financial situation and you don't get help with fees, it's always worth checking if you can get help with the court fees. You might be able to. If you can't get help with fees, then it might be better to go for a joint application maybe, because then you're in control and he's in control rather than his sole applications. Hopefully that helps. Thinking about starting it, thinking about divorce. I have so many dilemmas. I'm being pulled in different directions about divorce, scared to lose family members, and husband is refusing to leave the house and give me space. Yeah, really difficult one. I have my decree nisi and I'm able to apply for the absolute, except I'm on hold until I have the finance and childcare sorted. It is better to get this agreed before you apply for final order. I've started the process last week and having a really hard time with my husband. I emailed him last night about how to move forward. Okay. I've applied for divorce as sole applicant earlier this month. We currently share 50% custody. My husband was completely against divorce and he's narcissistic, so being quite difficult. He hasn't agreed to mediation. Okay, so I've got some questions there and I'll come to your questions at the end. So the way this will work is that I will talk for maybe 20-30 minutes. I'll be presenting information and then I will come to your questions. So the person who sent me that direct message, I've noted you down, so I'll come to you first. Okay. I've submitted divorce proceedings. He should have responded, but he hasn't. And I can see there's a question at the end of that, so I'll come to that. I've decided to divorce and communicated this, but he's refusing to end the marriage. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the information that I'll be presenting today, and then I'll come to your questions. But thank you so much for interacting. It really makes a difference for me when you are interacting with me, so I feel like I'm not alone talking to myself. So let me share screens and hopefully you'll be able to see that. Okay. Can you see that? Hope you can. I'll just keep an eye on the chat box as well while we're on here as well. So, right, let's see. Yes, you can see that. Perfect. I'm glad you can see that. Okay. So we've already talked about yesterday's information. Today is all about financial clarity and asset division. We need to go a bit deeper onto the finances. I know I touched on it a little bit yesterday, but actually this is quite a big area. And so I do need to spend a bit of time talking about finances, and I'm sure so many of you are worried about this anyway, and it can get quite complicated as well. I can't go too deep just because of time. So what I will be doing is talking generally about how we work through finances and how assets could be divided. I'll give you the general principles, but just so that you bear in mind, obviously I'm talking generally and I don't know your situation, so I can't necessarily tailor this to all of you. But hopefully, from even me talking generally, it will give you some information to start with. Take notes while I'm going through, because there'll be certain things that apply to you, and it's good to note them down so that you're getting the information that you need. Okay, so today I am going to cover different things, and let me show you what I will be covering. So we'll be talking a little bit about financial settlements, understanding what they are. And then how do you document your finances? Because that is part of the process that you need to go through when you're going through a divorce. And then I'll talk a little bit about dividing marital assets fairly, which all of these things are important. And I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, so feel free to put them in the chat box and you can send them privately as well. So I'll try and come to as many as I can. Obviously, I do run out of time. Some of the questions I've noted down, and I'll try and do some content around that so that you can at least get your questions answered. Okay, so what is a financial settlement? This is a settlement that you need to come to around marital assets so that you can share what you have between you. You do need to get to an agreement or an order which covers this share of finances. This order that you will get will be either a financial order by consent, or it will be a financial order which is ordered by a judge because you didn't get to an agreement or you couldn't get to an agreement. So there's two different ways of getting to that consent order, as I mentioned yesterday. It's either by agreement and you turn it into a consent order, which is approved by the court, or it is going through the court proceedings for a judge to decide what happens to all your assets and liabilities. And obviously, this is a very important order and something that you will be advised, and I would advise you to get, for most of you to get. Sometimes it's not possible, and that's a different situation. But if it is possible for you to get an agreement or a financial order that's ordered by the court, then I would definitely go ahead with that because it gives you certainty. You know exactly what's happening. You may have agreed to sell the family home and split the proceeds. Maybe one of you is staying in the family home while it's being sold. And you've got certainty about the date that the house is going on the market, who's paying the mortgage until the house is sold, what happens to the money from the sale proceeds, what happens, who gets paid, estate agents, solicitors, the mortgage gets redeemed. Maybe one of your mums gets a lump sum because they'd lent you some money. And then maybe you share the proceeds 60-40, for example. So you get certainty on exactly what is going to happen. So really important to get this. It's also legally binding. So in that situation, if one person refuses to actually sign the TR1 to sell the house, then the court will do it for you. So by having this order, then you can make sure it happens. Sometimes people do agree to something, it gets turned into an order, and then they change their mind or they want to be difficult. And this order means that you can actually make the things happen that you agreed. You also would not be able to make any further claims on each other. So once you've got this consent order, it means that you can draw a line under this and you can move on to get your final order granted. obviously give effect to this order, but move on with your life as well, which is really important. So you definitely want it to be legally binding, and you also don't want the other person to change their mind and to make a claim on you in the future. So whatever happens to you in the future, you might win the lottery, you might do really well at work, and your income has gone up, you might have a business that you've set up, and that's doing really well. And the other person can still never claim on you again as long as you've got this order. So it is really important to get it. The other thing that we are looking to achieve with a financial settlement is a clean break as much as possible. And what this means is that your assets are shared and there's no financial commitment between you in the future. So, for example, if you are transferring the family home into one person's name, then that transfer happens. It's not that you keep the house for 10 years in joint names and then later on it's sold. A clean break is what the court is looking for, that all assets are transferred into the person's name that they're supposed to go into, and there is no financial links between you, because these financial links can cause arguments in the future. One person may default on their mortgage and it will affect the other person. So the court really wants you to have a clean break. But remember, it's as much as possible. For some people, it's not possible to have a clean break. They have to keep assets in joint names. It may be that there's joint liabilities that are slowly being paid off. It might even be that you've got children. And when you've got children, you can't have a complete clean break because there's still child maintenance possibly being paid. So you may have a clean break on assets and liabilities, but not on child maintenance. So really important that you consider whether you can have a clean break. What's included in a financial settlement? So your financial settlement will cover everything that happens to all the assets, to all your liabilities and debts, and whether any provision needs to be made for, say, maintenance, child maintenance, spousal maintenance. And this financial settlement can cover so many different things. So what's going to happen to all the assets you have in your name, and in the other person's name and in joint names. But it can also cover what's going to happen to debts, who's keeping what debts, what gets paid off, how will it work, who's going to pay the mortgage going forward, how will income be divided, will there be spousal maintenance to help one person out for a limited period. So it can cover so many things, but it can cover even more things than this. There's quite a large number of things that your consent order can cover. So even things like both of you will have wills leaving your assets to the children. You can decide what's any agreements that you've reached that need to go in there. So it may be that if a house is being sold and money is being used to pay off one of the parents that had lent you money, that could go in there. So many things, even say, for example, what happens to your wedding and engagement rings, anything like that could go in there. But there's so many things, life insurance policies, medical insurance. So don't think that you have to limit it just to assets, liabilities, and maintenance. But that is the majority of what is in your consent order. So just so you know what can be included. So coming back to what is assets, your settlement needs to include assets, and these are property, so your family home, investment properties, savings, motor vehicles, shares, pension, all of these things are included as assets. And we're looking at assets in your sole name, the other person's sole name, and assets in joint names as well. You might have an asset in your name, but it may be that it's not fair to include it in the marital pot. So the assets that we are considering sharing are those in the marital pot. And the next question you're going to ask me is what is included in the marital pot and what is left out. So certain things like a property that you bought before you got married could be left out of the assets that's being shared. And you must have kept it completely separate, kept it in your sole name, and made sure that you didn't mix it into family funds. So if you remortgage this property you bought when you were 22, and you bought it in your own name before you were married, if you remortgage that property to buy your family home, then you've mixed it in and you can't keep it separate. But again, this is such a big area that I'm not going to go into it in too much more detail. But just so that you know that you make a list of your assets and then you think about anything that would be fair to leave out and whether you have a right to leave it out. So liabilities. Liabilities are all debts that you have in your name, the other person's name, and joint names. We're not really talking about mortgages here because that's included as part of assets. But it could include loans, credit cards, store cards, anything like this. Some people will say that they've got debts to family members, and they may include that here as well. So you do need to disclose what debts you've got. The other person needs to disclose what debts they've got, and then you consider which debts should be included. There's often arguments about money that's been borrowed from family and whether that needs to be paid back. Was that a gift or was that a loan? Obviously, when you get a credit card, we know that's a debt, but with a family member, was it a loan or was it a gift? And this is another question you need to consider. If somebody has given you money and there is no evidence of it being a loan, then it's assumed it's a gift unless the other person can prove otherwise. So with debts, we always get that question coming up. And maintenance, as I said, can include child maintenance. It can include spousal maintenance. Child maintenance is based on the non-resident parent's income and not your income. So if you are the resident parent, you have more time with the children, then the other person would give you maintenance. And child maintenance is based on their income, not yours. Spousal maintenance is slightly different. This is used to top up, say, for example, your income if you're on a lower income than the other person, and for a limited time, you might get top-up maintenance. It is generally for a limited time. Before, we used to see spousal maintenance for life, but we just don't see that anymore. The courts want both parties to be working and maintaining themselves as much as possible, but sometimes for a limited time, we need a top-up maintenance. So that's what spousal maintenance is. There is no set formula for spousal maintenance. It's based on disposable income for both of you. For child maintenance, you can go on a child maintenance calculator and work out what the child maintenance you should receive or that you'd be paying will be. So the first step is to document all of this. You need to document your assets. You need to document your liabilities. I've got a spreadsheet here that I use to document information. So you can log your assets and your liabilities in a spreadsheet. And you can also log your income and expenditure. And it's really important to do this because when we actually sit down and work it all out, what properties have you got? What are they worth? What's the market value of it? What's your mortgage outstanding? Do you have any second charges on that property? We start understanding what is in the pot to share. So it's really important to understand that. Same with liabilities. And what I do have, I'm just going to stop sharing now and I'll show you a spreadsheet that I have. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on a second. Okay, so this is the spreadsheet. And you can see bank accounts, investments, shares, bonds, cars, jewelry, watches, art, and then other assets. Sometimes you'll have something that's slightly out of all of those, but still an asset. It still has a value of more than £500. And then money owed to you. So if somebody owes you money, then that is an asset as well. Pensions and then debts. So you can see that spreadsheet there, and we will be sharing this spreadsheet with you. So you have something that you can copy and use to document your assets. and liabilities. And then we've got another tab on this spreadsheet, which is for your income and expenditure, because you will be asked this information. What is your income? And what's after expenses, what are you left with? Really important to do this exercise because I do this with all my clients so that I get a really good understanding of what, not only what assets there are, but actually what does their life look like right now? What will it look like once they're separated? Do we need to add maintenance in this? It helps me work out what settlement is good for them because when we put their mortgage amounts, we can see if they can get a certain mortgage amount takes them over what they can afford. So a really interesting process to do. And Nelma will share that spreadsheet, a link to that spreadsheet in the chat box, but also we'll send it out with the replay so you have it as well. So look out for that. Let me go back to my slides. So that's documenting your assets and liabilities, and take some time to do that. And that is one of the tasks for today, for you to note down what you have. And it might just be off the top of your head for now, but that's okay. And then go through and start looking at valuations of all your assets. And do you have documentary evidence of this as well? So think about doing that. Once we have done that, and obviously I'm going through quite quickly, these things do take time, but once you have done that, then we've got to consider what is the fairest way of splitting these assets and liabilities and income that you have. So there's lots of factors that we can take into account. These factors are contained at Section 25 of the Matrimonial Causes Act. And feel free to Google that. You can get a list of these factors. And actually, we may add that to our replay as well. Nelma, will you just make a note that we need to add that? I've got that document already, so we can add that when we send the replay out. Because it's useful for you to see all the different factors. I've noted down the main ones here just because of time. But it's really useful for you to have a look at that. So we'll send that over to you. What I'm going to do while I talk about these factors is give you a scenario, give you a case study so that I can actually show you in real time how we look at this. So this is just an example couple, Becky and Andrew. They've been married for 20 years. They've got 2 children. Their children are called Wayne, aged 14, and Bobby, aged 16. Becky is working full-time. Andrew is working part-time, and he has for many years because Bobby has a health condition. And that has required for one parent to be at home. Although Bobby is able to, he is able, but he does need some level of care. So Andrew has only worked part-time for 16 years. So this obviously is a scenario. I haven't given you all the details about their assets just because of time, but I'm going to go through all of these factors so you can see how we put this together. So the first thing on the list here is needs. And what we think about when we talk about needs is housing needs, income needs, capital needs, and pension needs. So these are all the different needs that a person has. Housing, you know, obviously the type of housing that you need. Income is what you need month to month to survive. Capital is maybe where you might need a lump sum, say, for example, to buy that house that is part of your housing needs, and pension needs, which is your income on retirement. So both parties' housing needs are similar. So Becky and Andrew have got the same housing needs because they've decided an arrangement where both boys will spend equal time with them. So Andrew could then increase maybe the time he goes back to work, and Becky may need to reduce some work time. But Bobby's a bit older now, and so doesn't have quite as much care needs as he did before. And the housing needs are a 3-bedroom house for both of them. Andrew's income needs would be met by keeping his mortgage installments low because obviously where he hasn't worked for 16 years, he obviously has lost quite a big chunk of career and earning capacity. So we need to make sure he can afford to pay his mortgage from his income, which means he probably has a bigger capital need. He may need a bigger lump sum from the settlement. We need to make sure that we can meet his housing needs from this. Andrew's income needs can be met by increasing the hours, because now Becky's got Bobby half the time. It means that Andrew can increase some income. His pension needs might be a bit difficult, because actually where he hasn't worked for quite some time, his pension is much smaller than Becky's. So it may be that we've got to look at a pension share as part of this settlement so that he gets a chance of having a reasonable income during retirement. So this is how we look at needs, and obviously it's a summary, but you get an idea of how to look at it. And what do we mean by resources here? Resources refers to any other resources a person may have. So this could include assets that you've left out of the marital pot. For example, if you had an inheritance that you received during the marriage and you kept it completely separate, you never mixed it with family money, that might be resources that you've got that's not being shared. It may not be fair to share it, but if we know that, say, Andrew has got £200,000 sitting in an account, it might not be shared, but we know he's got access to these resources. So the settlement may change slightly. If there wasn't sufficient to meet everybody's needs, it may be that that 200,000 might need to come back into consideration to meet everyone's needs. Welfare. Welfare is where we are talking about the children's welfare. So the children are absolute priority when we are looking at finances. We have to put them completely top of our mind. And same with child matters, they are obviously priority in everything. So in our example, if Andrew would be going to work, maybe he could increase some of his hours, but obviously he will still be working part-time because he still has a commitment to Bobby. It may be that if he can't get a job that pays enough, he has to live in the family home, possibly, to meet the needs of Bobby if the house has been adapted to suit him, possibly. So it may be that actually the needs are met by keeping things the same for Bobby, especially, but also for Wayne as well. So we have to consider the children first when looking at a settlement. The next factor there is length of settlement, length of marriage even. The length of marriage is relevant because if you've been married for 20 years, like Becky and Andrew, then that's considered a long marriage. And it's more likely that a judge is going to consider a split of equal shares in the settlement because you've been married so long. If the marriage has been 1 year, for example, then that's a short marriage, and it's likely that you would leave the marriage with the assets that you came into it with, and you would only share any joint assets that you've amalgamated since you got married. So you do have to consider length of marriage. The other thing you need to consider is contributions, and this lots of clients will ask me about. Contribution includes financial contribution, so Becky going to work full-time to make sure that they're able to pay their bills, pay their mortgage and survive. And obviously non-financial contribution as well. So Andrew has taken time out of his career to bring up the children, to care for Bobby, which again is an equal contribution to Becky's financial contribution. So that needs to be taken into account as well when we are looking at how assets are shared. And then finally, earnings and earning potential. So Andrew has worked part-time for 16 years. His earnings are much lower than Becky's. His earning potential, even if he worked full-time now, would be much lower. His mortgage capacity, therefore, is going to be much lower. He won't be able to raise finance as easily as Becky. So he might need more assets to allow him to manage financially and house the children half the time. So this earning potential, earnings, is relevant as well. So I'm going to conclude this part of it now, just so that we can come to some of your questions as well. To get to a fair settlement, there's lots of things that you need to consider, and I've talked about some of them. But the most important element is obviously priority is the children. What do they need? So you want to make sure that you are thinking about how to give the children stability. During this challenging time, you need to try and keep things the same as much as possible for the children. So what can you do to keep things the same? If they can live in the same location, that's great, because then they could go possibly to the same school. They keep the same friends. If you can keep the family home, then that's a good starting point. If one of you could keep the family home, because that means that from a housing point of view, they've got some stability. They're not in a position where they're leaving the area. You're both moving into new houses. They've got to navigate actually moving between parents not being together, the emotional impact that all this has, new school and new friends. So try and keep some things the same for them. Obviously, it depends on your circumstances, and everything here depends on your circumstances. But consider whether you can keep things the same. Consider all the assets when you're looking at a settlement. So many people say to me, well, we've decided that the family home is being split 50-50. And then I say, well, what about everything else? And they say, well, we're not looking at everything else. I don't want to know about anything else. We're just dealing with the family home. If you are looking at a settlement, really, you should be looking at everything that there is rather than one element. And you do want a settlement that considers you and the other person in the short term, medium term, and long term as well. So that's where a pension share possibly might be needed. And lots of you say to me that, well, of course, the assets have to be shared 50-50. So why are we talking about all of this? We just find out what the assets are and share them 50-50, or we just share the family home 50-50. Surely that's how it works. And everything in my bank account and my pension stays with me, and same for the other person. But that isn't how the court would look at this. What the court is looking at is fairness. The court wants to know exactly what there is in the pot. And they're looking at how do we make sure that this settlement is fair. And 50-50 is not always fair. And it's really important to know that fairness is not always equal shares. For example, if Andrew and Becky shared their assets 50-50, Andrew's going to be much worse off because he's got low earning capacity, low future earning capacity as well. He's not going to be able to get a big enough mortgage to buy himself a house. He's not going to be able to actually survive day to day, especially because when you are doing a 50-50 care arrangement with the children, then you don't pay maintenance to each other. So he wouldn't survive with a 50-50 settlement. So just bear in mind that a fair split may not be an equal share, but you've got to find options that work for you to meet all of your needs, and especially the children. So that's what I wanted to talk about around finances. And I know I've covered quite a bit, but I just wanted to give you a brief introduction in 30 minutes around finances and how we look at financial settlements. I'm going to just talk about what I want you to do as your day 2 task. So let me just go to that. So we'll be sharing that spreadsheet. So complete your asset and liabilities, income and expenditure. And obviously, I'm not expecting you to complete it by 9:30 tomorrow. Note down your assets and liabilities so that you know what you need to go and find out about. You need to get an idea of what your bank's statements say, what your balances are, what your debts might be, an approximate house valuation. So you could do some homework, and it's an important homework to do. And note down the documents you need to find to show the other person as part of financial disclosure. So, do you need to get a written valuation from an estate agent? Do you need to find out what the mortgage stands at? You don't need to actually get the documents, but just note them down. So you've got an idea of what you need to find to prove the value of the house, the mortgage, your bank statements, it may be share certificates, etc., to prove what assets, liabilities you've got. So it's quite a big task, but maybe if you just start it, that would be great. So that's day 2. And while I'm telling you about day 3, I would love it if you could actually tell me what you thought of today's talk so far. Put it in the chat box and feel free, obviously, I'm seeing lots of direct messages coming in. So day 3, we're talking all about children. And how do you go from this situation where you're living together with the children to coming up with a plan to share time with them? How does this work? What do you need to take into account? So a really important day tomorrow as well. So I'll be looking forward to seeing you there. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to start looking at your questions because I can see that you guys have put in quite a lot in the chat box. So let's have a look. What have you been saying? So the first one, I've got a question that I said I'd come back to. Okay. I've applied for, let me see, is this the one? Yes. I'm in the 20-week cool down period. Husband has not worked for 20 years. All bills and costs covered by me even now. He used up all the savings. He's not willing to sell the house. He's verbally said he doesn't want my pension, but I don't trust that. I'm nervous about applying for a conditional application, is not sure what happens to the house. Also, I have no will, so I'm assuming I need to do that quickly. You should always get your will drawn up when you are going through divorce proceedings. So if you don't have a will already, or if you've got one that leaves all your assets to the other person, then if you want that to change, then obviously consider getting your will done now. And you may want to leave your assets to the children if you have any, or somebody else. So it's definitely worth considering that. I wouldn't apply for a conditional order if you think he may apply for final order. And then obviously there may be issues there. So the thing to do is to resolve financial matters first, now that you're at conditional order. If you can't get to an agreement, consider how else you can get this decided. You could use family, friends, mediation, roundtable meetings, all sorts of things to try and get to an agreement, as long as you've got disclosure. Obviously, you can't get to an agreement if you don't know what the assets are. So that's your first step. Okay, let's see what else. I've submitted divorce proceedings. He should have responded by the 4th of July and he hasn't. Does the 20-week period start after he has acknowledged? Really interesting question, and actually probably important for so many of you. The 20-week period starts once the court has issued the application, not once the other person has acknowledged. So your time frame is already moving. So don't worry about that. If the other person has not responded, then you are going to need to show the court that they have received the application. And you can do that in different ways. You could send a process server around to serve the divorce application on him. That's probably the quickest way. They would then write a report to say they've served the documents on him, and the court would allow you to move forward to conditional order. But there are other orders that you could make called deemed service and alternate service as well. But those are other ways of getting around it. Okay. I've decided to divorce and communicated this to my husband. Husband is refusing to end the marriage, so I want to now proceed with the sole application. No idea what to do with the house and finances. That will come once you get disclosure done and you start coming up with proposals. And that's, once you start looking at different proposals that you could put together, then suddenly you can start seeing how this could work. It's just taking one step at a time. I'm not sure if it will make sense to go for financial settlement, because if he doesn't come to voluntary disclosure, then I would have to go to court, which is an expensive affair. Although I am from finance background, but the anxiety is making it difficult for me to make sense of the numbers. And actually, that's probably most of you. I remember feeling really anxious when I got divorced. And as I said, I knew how to look at my own financial settlement, but it's the emotions that stop you. If you were doing this for somebody else, you could make more sense of it. Obviously, I do this for people every day, so I can very quickly come up with proposals and look at the numbers with you. if you've got assets, then you should look at a financial settlement, because otherwise you're not protected. And it may be that, say, a family home in joint names can't stay in joint names. If you're getting divorced, at some point you need to resolve that. So you will need to take those steps. But obviously you may need to get some help around that if you're struggling to do it yourself. I went for a sole application, intended to do it joint, but was advised for speed to go sole, as a joint relies on communication. I think that's probably the right step. He is going to fight at every step, have financial muscle, is narcissistic, and won't agree to mediation. And there is social services involved due to his behavior with our 3-year-old. So you've got a lot of things going on. That is a lot. But you may think he's going to fight at every step, but you are going to have to stay strong and take each element, because just because that person is strong doesn't mean that you can't get through this. You have to have a game plan. You need a strategy, and you need also a strategy on how to keep your mindset right, because mindset is a lot of this. If you can't get your mindset right, it's really hard to get through. It doesn't matter that whether you've got financial muscle or any of the rest of it. Get yourself mentally strong, get yourself ready for, almost expect the worst, but hope for the best. And sometimes things change. You'll be really surprised. You get through this, you start moving forward, and something happens. And I had a client recently that was in that place. She had court proceedings for children and finances. And she got a really good result on the children matter, which, sometimes you doubt yourself, am I doing the right thing? But she got a really good result. And I think that good result will mean that the other person now is more willing to negotiate the finances. So you've got social services involved. You might find that actually they are pushing things, they're safeguarding issues, and you might end up on a higher step than you think. Just get your mindset right about that, and also get some help. Have started divorce proceedings as a sole applicant, found yesterday's session useful, but keen to learn about the financial process. Hopefully you got some ideas today. I do a talk on how to negotiate as well on Wednesdays. So one of the talks will be about that. Feel free to come along to that. Conditional order is dated at 19th of November, but don't understand. Do I have to do anything? Reconditional order. You'll get an email from the court saying you can now apply for conditional order. And if you want to go ahead with it, click on the buttons and you'll be applying for it. You don't necessarily have to do anything else. If I have to do anything, can I delay until I've attended mediation? I wouldn't apply for conditional order quickly. You don't have to apply on the 19th of November. You could apply next February if your finances aren't resolved. Don't rush that bit if you don't have to. When you are being asked to apply for conditional order, it will take about 3 weeks to get. So I wouldn't stress about getting it straight away if you're worried. Another question, can I recover jewelry which I had given during marriage? And I get asked this a lot, or the jewelry which my parents gave to his family during marriage. Jewelry that you own is an asset. It may have been a gift. You may have bought it yourself, but actually, depending on the type of jewelry, especially if it's Indian gold jewelry, it does have a value. So you do want to consider that. If he's got jewelry that he was given and it's in his possession, it needs to be valued and added into the pot. If you've got jewelry, then maybe you could add it as well. So get that valued. Jewelry that your parents gave to his family may be difficult because actually it's not owned by the two of you anymore. My friend is at post-divorce and she still has problems with her narcissistic ex-husband. She still wants to join large family gatherings because her grown-up children are there, but he still intimidates her by approaching her quite a bit during the event. Of course, this isn't legal, but actually I remember feeling very similar to this because I wanted to attend family gatherings. I really wanted to be there because actually I was so close to his family, and I had a lot of love for them. And so I wanted to be around them, but it was really difficult. It's when you're in this position, going to family gatherings is hard for him. It was hard for me. It was hard for the family. And even though I did get invited to weddings and initially I went and I love seeing them, I realized very quickly it was quite painful for me. It was quite painful for him, and neither of us needed that. Now, when I get invited, 13 years on, obviously it's very different. But I see, yeah, I may see his family and we organize that separately. So it's not triggering anymore and it's not painful anymore. But actually, it might still be too painful for her to go to family gatherings. And you have to remember that their loyalty will be with their family member, not with the other person. So slowly you need to start separating this unless it's not painful and everybody's happy with this situation. I've submitted a joint application for divorce, which is now going through the 20-week period. I just need to ensure that the division of assets is done properly. And you're absolutely right with that comment. You need to do this properly. You only get one go at it. And the number of people that rush through this bit, they don't do the work, they don't get good help through it, and then they regret what they'd agreed, or they've made mistakes in what they agreed. I had a lady contact me recently who said, the family home is due to go into my name. The consent order says this. I'm supposed to put it into my name in a year, which in effect is okay. But I've got 3 really young children. I'm only working 1 day a week. The family home has a mortgage of 500,000. It's got to go into my name. What shall I do? I can't get a mortgage. And obviously your advisor didn't help you or explain this to you, or you didn't get financial advice. So don't rush it, because later on, when you've got that consent order that is wrong or that agreement that doesn't work, she had to sell her family home with 3 really small children and get something much smaller because she couldn't get a mortgage, and that wasn't considered during her division of assets. So take it slowly, do it properly. What duration of marriage is defined as medium-term marriage? Does having a kid affects financial split? So medium term would be 10 years approximately. We're not given a sort of an idea, but a short marriage is say 1 to 3 years. I would say 6 years upwards is medium. 15 years onwards is starting to become a longer marriage. But when you have a child, even if you've been married 1 year, things are different because the child comes first. What if the house is already in my name solely? So I don't know what you're asking me. I know you put a question mark in there. Are you saying, can you just keep it because it's in your name? Should it go into the pot? If it's in your name and you're both living there as a married couple, it is a marital asset and should go in the pot. It doesn't matter that it's in your name. It doesn't matter if an asset, say bank savings, are in your name. They're still a marital asset usually. So that house that's in your name may still be a marital asset. It may still need to be sold or transferred to the other person, or it stays with you. It's still the same options, regardless of it being in your name. Okay, I know we're a bit short of time and there's so many questions. So I'll take the next 2 and then I'll leave it there. How does financial settlement work in case of kids? The non-resident parent is supposed to pay for maintenance, which he isn't in my case. So number 1, if you have more of the care of children, then it's likely that you should be getting child maintenance. If the other person isn't paying child maintenance, even though you've requested it, the child maintenance service can help you. Contact them. They will make a calculation. They will speak to the other person, find out their income, get evidence of the income, and will tell you how much that person has to pay you. If they don't pay it, it will go into arrears, and then they will take steps to get those arrears back. So you can leave it with them. So that's the first thing. Your second question is, what about major expenses like college, school trips, child illness, or any other expenses? So the first thing, child illness, I don't know what you mean by that from an expense point of view, but you may need to take the day off work if the child is meant to be with you. If the child is meant to be with the other person, then obviously their parent on that day, they have to take responsibility. But things like university, school trips, extracurricular activities, they don't have to pay for that unless you reach an agreement on that. So say, for example, your child maintenance is £400 a month. if you cannot afford school trips out of that and they are not willing to go halves with you on school trips or extracurricular activities, then you can't necessarily force them. You could put it in your consent order that they pay for school trips, lunch, extracurricular activities as agreed, because you're not going to know exactly what trips there will be. So it will have to be as agreed. It depends on what they've got financially, and it depends on whether you can afford it financially. So you can add it, but say, for example, there's a trip to Iceland which costs £2,000 and the other person just cannot afford it. You can take them to court and they will say, we couldn't afford it. What can you expect the court to do? They won't do much in that situation. Things like university fees, what costs, what most people do is put something in the order that says that we will both pay equal expenses to the child's reasonable expenses for when they're at university. And reasonable expenses could mean anything. It depends where they go to university. They may not even go. You know, if your child's 3, you may not know what's going to happen. So we can't make it a definite. We can just put something in there. Nursery fees, which you said you are paying, you can actually put that in a court order that you split the nursery fees 50% each, for example. So I'm going to take the next one as my last question. He has deliberately taken a lower paid job and I'm worried that he's going to try and get my pension. He has other property too, but wants me to give equity from our home. So you have to look at this as a whole settlement. If there is a family home and there's other property, is that other property part of your marital pot? If it is part of your marital pot, you've got to consider all of it together. So you're not just taking equity from the home. What's happening to everything? And then what does that mean? So hopefully that explains that part of it. If the other property is out of the marital pot, then it's just the family home that you are looking at. One of you, the only things you can do with the family home is one, he keeps it, you keep it, it's sold, or you keep it in joint names until your youngest child is 18. These are the kind of options you've got for the family home. He's taken a lower paid job deliberately. So when we talked about earnings, obviously his earning is going to be much lower now than it used to be. But you can look at likely earnings or earning capacity. It may be that you know that he will earn £5,000 a month when the divorce is done, but at the moment he's only earning £1,000. And I would take the earning capacity of 5,000 as part of the numbers that I would be looking at, because I know that actually his earning capacity is much higher. You can't force somebody to take a job earning £5,000 if they don't want to, but your settlement could be based on that. Okay, so I hope that's helped. I know that there's lots of questions and I'll take a note of all of them and try and come back to some of you or create some information for you around it. So hopefully that will help. Do let me know what you thought of today's talk. I tried to cover as much as I could in an hour, and it's pretty tricky because finances is such a deep topic. There's so much to cover. But the other thing is, it's dependent on your situation. And so the only way that I could really answer all your questions would be to know more about your situation. So at least that way, you get an idea of what your settlement could be. And I know that Nelmar did drop a link to how to book a call. So if you want to find out a bit more about your situation, then feel free to complete that and I'll ask Nelma to get in touch with you. Okay, so it's great to hear your insights, opening my eyes. Thank you for taking time to help us. Will you be doing this 4-day event again in the near future? My cousin is going through a divorce and I think it will help her. She can register and get the replays. So it could definitely help her to watch the replays back. But yes, I do them from time to time. So I'm sure we'll have another one scheduled. Always helpful, still worried I'm going to be ripped off. I think the person that wrote that as a direct message, just get some help with it so that you know what your rights are. Fantastic session, thank you. So high stakes, yet so emotionally loaded. Plus, of course, it's a first time situation. Yeah, absolutely. Most of you have never been through this before. So when you're doing this for the first time, it is really tough. Hopefully, you'll never go through it again. But emotions are such a big part of this, which makes it really hard. If there was no emotions involved, you could all do this. But yeah, it's difficult because it is so emotionally loaded. So thank you for sharing that. I will go through all your chat messages, so thank you for dropping them there. And there'll be a replay. With the replay, you will get that spreadsheet, and I'll drop you the Section 25 factors so you can have a look at them in a bit more detail, but also the others that are relevant too. I only went through a few of them. So thank you so much for being here. It's been really good to have you here live. Do watch the replay. It's great to get the interaction from you because I feel like I'm not on my own just talking to a screen when I can see some of you, but also you guys are sharing with me. So it does make a big difference. So thank you, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'm just going to turn my camera off and put myself on mute. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on the session today. Is there a time limit on the replay? Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think that it will be in the future shared on YouTube. So look out for it there. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Nelma, could you put that in the chat box so that anyone who wants to subscribe can? And then you'll see all the other videos that I'm doing and anything else that I'm sharing. I've got some new things coming up where I am starting to share people's stories that have actually been through a divorce. And each person, when they share their story, there's really interesting things that came out of it, how they helped themselves, the different things they used. So I've just started recording these sessions for YouTube, so you'll see them on there soon. I think the stories are so important for you guys to get inspiration, to get hope, and to get learning. So they'll be on my YouTube channel as well. Have a good rest of the day. It's been so nice to have you here, and I'm so glad that you were finding it useful as well. But feel free to put your comments in. I'll still be watching and looking out for them. Take care. See you soon.